let's talk a little bit about how it cost or just additional data might look like and how you can bring that and connect it with a model that was maybe drawn by Lucidscale. So the work that we're going to do here is actually going to be done in Lucidchart. Lucidscale does have some capabilities here. For example, you'll notice a lot of our templates. One of them is a cost-saving insights template that we offer as a standard that'll help highlight maybe, certain things are above a certain size or at a certain tier or are unattached, so you don't want to pay for them. So we can help you find those things and highlight them directly within Lucidscale. But within Lucidscale, most of what we're showing is data that's pulled directly from those Azure APIs and mapping out that infrastructure. You may have additional information that you'd like to add here. And for that, if you bring it over to Lucidchart and out to diagram with freeform shapes, what you end up with is a copy of that diagram in Lucidchart where you can leverage all these other features, including a feature that Lucid has called data linking and things like formulas. So what you can see here is I have actually chosen to import some data. Now, it's really important to highlight here that when you import data in Lucidchart, I'm using a Google Sheets here. Just know that it supports, CSV. Sorry, let me search for my Azure cost mapping, I think I called it. So it supports Google Sheets, CSV, and Excel. And we also do have an API option where you could feed in the data. However, probably the most important thing to know is that we're looking for a very simple layout of the sheet. So I'll show you mine. The simple layout is in row 1, there is sort of a bunch of headers. So the titles of the columns, this will make it easier to reference these fields that we're going to add to shapes. And there's some kind of unique identifier. You could use resource name or resource ID, which is more likely to be unique in this case in Azure. And then whatever other data you want to add here. In my case, I've made up some fake cost data and done some summaries here. You can choose to bring in whatever you want. It would be on you to kind of go find that data and then get it into a format that Lucid can import and read. And again, you could do that as a spreadsheet or feed it in via our API. What's key though is, again, you've got those simple header rows and that you have a simple, unique identifier here. Now I'm not going to click finish because I actually already have this imported. So you can see here what that spreadsheet looks like. In the case of Google Sheets or the API, you could actually always have this refreshable, meaning that you don't even have to replace the spreadsheet, but if you had a CSV or an Excel file, you could. And now for how to get the data onto the shapes. Well, one way would be to actually just drag and drop the data, but that can be a little bit tedious. Another way would be, because in this case, this was exported from Lucidscale, and there already includes things like the ID and things pulled over from Azure that were pulled directly via Lucidscale, we could actually leverage some Lucid formulas, global formulas, to pull in a couple fields, specifically to pull all that information into an object on the shape, and then even to pull out pieces into differently named fields just to make them easier to reference. So you'll see here what looks like a mess at the page level. So I don't have a single shape selected. I have added a field here. I've named it. And then in this case, I've put in a formula called Lookup. If you've used Excel, this should sound familiar. Specifically, I'm looking for sheet 1 because that is the name of my data set. Yours might have a different name. You'd put that here. And then I am telling it to look for this dot ID. Now, why am I doing that? Well, this is sort of Lucid shorthand for the shape we're on currently. And .id is the name of this field here that I happen to know is unique and that I also happen to know I have in this column. So we're going to sort of map that. And what I then need to do, and it's going to error on the page because the page doesn't have an ID property, I'm going to choose to apply to all shapes. And you'll notice now that property 5 has a bunch of data on every single shape here. So that's how I got this resource data one here. In order to do these other ones, I did something similar. So I just referenced the resource data that's on the current shape. This @ symbol is shorthand for this dot, so it's very similar. And then I used dot notation to grab from that resource data full row of data. I specifically want the column year-to-date total, which is a column in my spreadsheet all the way over here, or year-to-date average, or year-to-date cost trend. All of things, remember, you can go get the data from wherever, bring it in here, and then we can kind of help you get it onto the shape. So I'm going to just delete this extra field. So as I look at some of these, you'll notice that inherited from the page, they each have a row of data that looks like a little JSON object. And then they've each pulled out the cost, the average cost, and the cost trend directly from whichever row had the, scroll back over here, resource ID that matched this ID that we pulled from Lucidscale. So we've kind of done a sort of join on these little data using our formulas. And now we can use those specific fields to do some fun stuff. For example, I've created a conditional formatting rule that's going to, on hover, format that number as currency and show me for each instance, what's that average cost or the total cost. And in this case, I also had that field where I was checking the cost trend, and I've chosen to format it. So you can see here it's, minus 0.9, so minus 90%. So it's gone down 90%, whereas this one has gone up 251%. I was using random numbers, so these costs are all over the place. But that is how you can kind of pull in and map over some additional data into Lucidchart and map it to something with Lucidscale. I'll also highlight too, this is showing how to use some of those other smart Lucidchart features. I am pulling in this case, I'm summing up that average cost and formatting it as currency. I have a manual input for the budget cost here. So I could change that and I would see, potentially a very big change in my little dynamic shape. And I'm even calculating the difference so that I can see if I'm under or over. This dynamic shape, which is a shape that Lucid just has natively, you can find it in the shape libraries. I usually just go search dynamic and drag out my little donut. And I'm using basically the same formulas here, although I'm pulling just the budget from this shape by saying, go find budget that's on a child of the page. There's only one, so it's nice and easy. And in this case, I'm also pulling the total value just like I did here. So you can create kind of fun, dynamic, interesting headers here as well. One final thing to note, while obviously I focused here on cost, data that you could go find somewhere, pull it into the format you want, and then feed it to Lucidchart and merge it here using the method I've shown, you could do this with other kinds of data too. So if you had data on maybe compliance or security incidents or usage data of some kind, if you wanted to bring that in using this method or using, again, the data API that we offer, provided that, as I've said, you get into a format that Lucid can read via this data linking. You could have multiple data sets. You could make more of these rows, and you could produce some really interesting diagrams by leveraging that combination of Lucidscale and Lucidchart and some of these advanced data features that are really unique to our platform. Okay, I hope that was helpful. And when you try this out and finish it out, don't forget to share it with your teammates so they can see all the awesome things you're working on.